The movie is called Lakshya. They have Preeti Zinta. She's based on you. I was 2 years old when the Kargil war happened. You basically brought the war to people's homes.
Even today, I have goosebumps when I talk about it because it was such a transformative, privileged experience to have. At this point, I have zero background, zero exposure. I covered Kargil without a bulletproof vest, sometimes sleeping in the backseat of a car, sometimes behind a big boulder, sometimes in an underground bunker. We were able to see, capture, and film, and we would have bombs exploding literally at our feet, and we would go running for cover, and we didn't even understand what was happening. I remember interviewing Vikram Batra. And I said, "Aapko dar nahi lagta?" And he threw his head back and he laughed and he said, "Ye dil mange." 10 years later, I drove with Vikram's twin brother Vishal. We went to the mountain that was now called Batra Top, named after Vikram. And I remember sitting with Vishal there, and Vishal sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and then wrote a letter to his brother. And we kind of, like setting a bird free, we set that letter into the blue skies. And he said, "I know, Vikram, you can hear me somewhere." And how much we wept. Like, we literally held each other and we wept.
नमस्कार मेरे दोस्तों, स्वागत है आपका दोस्त कास्ट के एक नए एपिसोड पे. माय नेम इज विनम्र कसाना. You're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify, 5 stars, please. We're the best. Today's guest is also the best when it comes to journalism. She calls herself a conflict reporter. She brought the Kargil war to our TV screens and made us realize the horrible cost of war. I was too young. I was 2 years old. But she made a name for herself. She's also known for her immersive on-ground reporting during COVID, during 26/11. You name it. If there was a crisis in the country, then she was there to cover it. She's fearless. She asks tough questions and is not afraid to also answer tough questions. Today's guest is the super esteemed and super awesome and super delightful adjective, Barkha Dutt on Dostcast. I had a blast talking to her. You'll see exactly why. The episode begins in 3, 2, 1. We were talking about the constraints of TV, and you were talking about how that disciplined you. We'll start on that note.
So look, as somebody who calls myself a child of television, and what I mean by that is I'm a first generation broadcast journalist. I entered this industry when television news was just starting in India. There were things about TV I loved, and there were things about TV I came to hate. So in a way, to be at a digital platform, to run my own company is liberating. But TV's constraints, as you call them, taught me the most valuable thing in live programming. And we do a lot of live programming, which is discipline. Also, eye to detail, and also the capacity to multitask. But I don't know if that came from TV. I think that comes A, from my personality, and B, from my actual trained background in production.
Sure. And you said you had 2 masters, one of them in production. That is why we were perhaps seeing your David Fincher come out as you were dismantling my
Oh no, I'm so
flimsy
sorry.
production.
I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think that happens when you're obsessive about your work. But tell me more about this background in production.
So I do literature at St. Stephen's College, and I am wanting to be a lawyer. Part of me is wanting to be a lawyer, but part of me knows that I'm going to do something in mass comm, and I want to do something with creative expression.
Hmm.
It so happens, because so many decisions get taken by, circumstances that are coincidental, that the entrance for the law faculty exam and for the Jamia Mass Communication Research Center, MCRC as it was called, are on the same day. And I've got to literally make a split-second decision. At that time, if you weren't going abroad, the only place that you could get a degree in mass communication was this center in Jamia, where famously Shah Rukh Khan had also studied. But they took 30 kids from across India. It had a really tough entrance, and like you had to, ace that entrance to get a seat. So that master's was my first master's, and it was in film and TV production. So when I graduated from Jamia, and television news was just beginning in India, in privatized television news, which began with then NDTV and India Today being asked to do 30 minutes of a news bulletin in English and Hindi for Doordarshan. I actually joined NDTV as a sound engineer. I was in PCR, what we call PCR, production control room. I was at the faders. I was at the mixer. I was the sound producer.
Damn.
Mhm.
So you must really know about gain.
I know
noise.
gain, I know levels, I know noise cancellation, treble, the high notes, the low notes, that echo. But because I began at the back end and I had trained in production, I never saw form and content as two separate buckets. Like for me, form and content are related because that's how I was trained. I'm
Very
not saying
interesting.
everybody with me was like that. I mean, I happen to be one of those crazy people who thought I would make movies. I wanted to be a producer. I wasn't sure that I always wanted to be a reporter.
So you're saying that because of that training, you had precision in the way you reported, and also precision in the way your stuff was shot and filmed, and
I
even
mean,
the audio.
I'm not trying to make a boastful statement. I'm just saying my training was such that I noticed things that, let's say, people who had come in from a newspaper background. A lot
Yeah.
of people in Indian TV came in from a newspaper background. I didn't come from any, I came straight from a trained production context. So I was not just noticing things, I was interested in them. I was interested in how is this edit going to happen? What is the lighting like? Can we make it better? Is there a way to make this better? And I was very interested in this idea of writing to pictures, right? Till before TV became this talking head shop, which is what it is now, the way we were trained is that you went out, you did stories, and you wrote to pictures. Now, let me give you an example. I covered a tsunami. Now, I saw a clock that had been swept away by the water floating in the water of the tsunami. And I had to write my script. Now, if I were writing a script for a newspaper or a text oriented digital platform, I would write, the tsunami came, this is what it left in its wake, this is what I saw. But I knew that the pictures were already there and the viewer, the audience could see those pictures. So I used the image of that clock and my script said, I still remember it, time stood still in Nagapattinam today, right? That is writing to a picture. Unfortunately, from Indian television news, pictures have vanished. Where are the pictures? All you see all the time are people in a studio talking. It was one of the reasons that television for me lost its charm. But because I had that production background, I could see that this is how the image can be used, and the text that accompanies the image shouldn't duplicate the image. The
Hmm.
text has to enhance the image.
Right. It should not be literally describing what the thing is.
Correct.
It should add, perhaps even contrast with it.
Correct.
So that
Correct.
it's very similar in the science of YouTube thumbnails, where you often
Oh my
have,
god, teach me that, यार. हम तो पागल हो गए हैं. मतलब these thumbnails, I am using your very successful podcast to make an appeal to find me somebody who makes good thumbnails.
happy to
I mean,
give
one
you
of
a
my
few people.
producers who's here right now, Ria, she makes some pretty cool thumbnails.
Yeah.
But it's a science and an art both. This YouTube thumbnail is a science and an art.
Well, the key is that you have to maximize click-through ratio, right? Which often this is also very interesting in the way where, since we don't have journalistic training, most YouTubers who end up becoming either commentators or in the socio-political space, or podcasters like myself who cover everything, the line for packaging and what is ethical is often blurred, because largely the thumbnails are a video editor's or a thumbnail editor's medium, as opposed to the medium of someone who sort of is the host of the program.
Sure.
So we started using RageBait when we first started. And how I figured out how to get views is to start using the most negative verbs, right? So destroyed, roasted. I mean, these are the strongest ones that I often use.
Yeah.
Destroyed, roasted. But then I started seeing how television journalists do it, how print journalists do it. They're slightly more subtle. Claps back is one, right? You said this is when time stood still. So I started to see that we often have to rely on capitalizing the negative verb, versus those who write for print, they can sort of use an entire sentence and turn a phrase. This turning of phrase, did you learn this from copywriters, from others around yourself? Like, how do you, like that
For
tsunami story?
digital or for television?
For both. अगर आपको दोस्तकास्ट पसंद है और आप अक्सर यूट्यूब पे देखते हैं इस पॉडकास्ट को, तो स्पॉटिफाई पे दोस्तकास्ट को जरूर चेक करना. वहां पे हम अनरिलीज एपिसोड्स निकालते हैं, बेस्ट ऑफ दोस्तकास्ट निकालते हैं, और भी बहुत कुछ. लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन में है.
Totally self-taught. Nobody does my writing for me. Like I mean, obviously there are people assigned in different roles every day in my team, but in terms of writing, I understood the different. So look, I write a column, so I write for a newspaper. I have spent 22 years in television, which is a different kind of writing, and I have now in my 5th year at Mojo Story, which is digital. All 3 writings are completely different. They're all totally different writings. So, for example, when I started on digital, that temptation to be clever, or subtle was very high. And I had to train myself that search engine optimization, or SEO as we call it,
Yeah.
is not rewarding the cleverest caption. It may sometimes be rewarding the most stupid, mundane caption. So, like
Yeah.
if I'm doing a story on Manipur and I want to write something evocative of this ground report I've done, but actually my caption has to start with Manipur news latest. Manipur news latest. I mean, for
That's so
me,
funny.
as a writer, to accept that Manipur news latest is going to get me the views, very difficult adjustment. Mental switch,
Yeah.
बहुत मुश्किल है. But that's the truth. You learn, you self-teach, you watch YouTube videos on how to do YouTube video writing, you read up, you look at global examples, you look at global parallels, you teach yourself. And the fun part is you're constantly doing something new. Otherwise, life would be so boring, yeah.
A simple pause for an elegant ad read, and then we're back to the episode. Thank you.
नम्र भाई यार एक बहुत बड़ा पंगा हो गया है. मेरा ना ईमेल हैक हो गया है, वो भी 3 हफ्तों से, और मुझे अब पता चल रहा है.
Of course भाई, ये तो होना ही था. पूरे दिन तू Instagram पे अपने प्यार का डंका पीटता रहता है. Let me guess, तेरा पासवर्ड है प्रिया मेरी जान 69.
अरे यार तुझे भी पता है मेरा पासवर्ड. अब करूँ क्या मैं भाई?
I'm sorry man, I don't know what to say. Whatever happened to my friend could also happen to you. I'm not trying to scare you, but according to a study, roughly 30% internet users don't even know their email accounts could be compromised. But I have an easy fix for you. Introducing 4hackers.app, your AI-powered cybersecurity companion that is changing the game. Let me tell you how it works. Whether you're a tech rookie or a seasoned hacker, here's how 4hackers can help you. Number 1, it can detect if you're hackable. Number 2, it can predict likely security threats to your company. Number 3, it can analyze vulnerabilities by just using a simple prompt. Number 4, if you don't know how to code, no problem. You can still get practical hands-on hacking knowledge. 4hackers has an amazing free version, but it's got certain limits. On the other hand, I think the pro version is a killer, and I'm not making this up. This is not some far-fetched theory. This is real, actionable cybersecurity at your fingertips. Now, if you're serious about your cybersecurity, all you have to do is go to the link in my description and start using their free AI companion. And if you use my promo code DOST, that's DOST, you'll get a flat 10% discount. Once again, that's 4hackers.app. You can find the link in my description. And now, back to the episode. Yeah, no, first of all, congratulations on the success of Mojo Story. It's got
Thank you.
1.87 million subscribers. I was very happy to be on it and talk about
Yes.
the incident that happened at the Habitat.
Yes.
I want to dial back to something else.
Yes.
I was using my AI to do research on you because I've completely given up all my own research. No, I'm
Isn't
kidding.
that dangerous? Because the internet's so full of rubbish also.
It is.
Yeah.
No, what I actually use it for is I use it for counter arguments, or I use it for extracting things that the naked eye might miss.
Sure.
If you're spending a day doing something and you go through Google and you pass through stuff,
Hmm.
you might miss things that are in archived pages. So it has access to that. One thing that struck me was you've always been someone who's lived and has been brought up in Delhi, right? Is that
Except New York.
except
The
New York.
only other city that I've ever lived in my life for a significant period of time is New York. I went to school there as a kid, and I
You
went
went to school in New York.
for a few years, yes,
Okay.
in public school, PS 99, Kew Gardens, Queens, because my father, who worked with Air India, was posted there. My mother, who worked with the Hindustan Times, took leave and worked at the United Nations. So we shuttled between both countries, and I went to school with my sister for a few years in New York. And then I returned to do my second master's at Columbia. So I lived there again. And so the only other place that I have ever lived in is New York.
So New York and New Delhi, it's perfect.
Yep.
It's two major, not capital cities, two major cities in the world from two major civilizations. Let me ask you this. As someone who grew up in Faridabad, which is an hour from Delhi, I have now read 3 books about Delhi. One only halfway through, but the rest 2 completely. One is Khushwant Singh's Delhi, and I've read many of his books.
He was my mother's editor, by the way.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So I've read his books. I also read William Dalrymple's City of Jinns, which is a good book to sort of understand the history of the city and whatnot. And then recently I've been reading Rana Dasgupta's Capital, right? For me, Delhi has always been this romanticized city of arches and architecture and slowness. And now I live in Bombay and Bandra, which is the home of gentrification and little bit beauty. But as someone who's grown up around here, what keeps you here? What's the flavor of the city? How has it changed over the years?
Yeah, it's a great question because, last evening I was at a friend's place, and from the terrace we could look out at a lit Humayun's tomb and the moon over this Humayun's tomb, and it was just gorgeous. And then there are other days when, could be the park in front of my house in Greater Kailash where, I don't know, the bougainvillas are in full bloom, right? And sometimes Delhi is so beautiful and breathtakingly beautiful that it just makes my heart stop. But the tragedy of Delhi is that its most beautiful months have now become its worst months because of the air.
Mhm.
I have become asthmatic in my middle age because of the air. I have been hospitalized with pneumonia because of the air. And I am, for the first time in my life, thinking, okay, maybe I need to find some other place where I can go to for a few months. But I will say this about Delhi. Not just is it beautiful to me because it's like home to me, I think it is perhaps the only non-parochial city in India.
So parochial is agricultural.
Nahi, parochial means there's no insider outsider in Delhi.
Okay.
Up in Mumbai, there is we are the locals, they came from outside. In Bangalore, there is a debate about local language. Do you know the
Correct.
local language? In Tamil Nadu, the high sense of identity. Do you know the language? Like, look at the language wars.
Hmm.
This is a city of refugees, partially. I grew
Yeah.
up in a refugee colony, by the way, called Jangpura Extension. My father's family came from Pakistan, now Pakistan, then India, undivided India, as it was splitting, with nothing. From a very, very, very wealthy family in Sialkot to nothing, to penury, homelessness. Like many other families, were given a little handkerchief size plot, which was given to refugees. Right? Jangpura Extension was a refugee colony. Delhi is partially, not fully, a city of refugees. Therefore, it doesn't have an insider-outsider dimension to it.
But it does have a class problem.
Of course, all of India has a class problem. But it doesn't have these are the natives of Delhi and these are the outsiders.
But Barkha, we're so we really other the people who are northeastern. We really other the South
Absolutely,
Indians.
but that's not
We
particular to
also
Delhi.
other the Purvanchalis here. ऐसी बात तो नहीं.
Arey bhai, that's not peculiar to Delhi. That is our structural problem as classist Indians, in an unequal society, with traces of subconscious racism, whether over someone from the northeast or the color of someone's skin. I mean, I was interviewing the Kerala Chief Secretary the other day. She's the Kerala Chief Secretary. She's the highest officer rank in that state. And she's telling me since the age of 4, she has felt that because she's dark-skinned, she has been treated poorly. So, of course, I'm not romanticizing Delhi. I'm saying everybody loves their home. This is my home. It gives me a sense of community. It doesn't mean that, like we know that there are flaws in our family, we can see them. We can see them in our own parents. Delhi has flaws. I'm not going to whitewash Delhi. Delhi has many flaws, but it is a beautiful, all-inclusive. It is a very inclusive city. It's a very. Your point is taken about class and othering, but I'm saying that's not peculiar to Delhi. That's not peculiar to Delhi. That is us as a society.
And what about discovering new places?
I'm terrible that way. Even on holidays, I keep going to the same place. Like, everybody in my family hates me because I never want to go to any new place. Like, every holiday, I will go to New York. If I can. Like, if I can make it, if I can either I can combine some work or combine a conference, or if I can, afford to do it. I want to be working all the time, but I also like going to the same place. I like going eating at the same restaurant if I like it once. I like watching the same serial if I don't rewatch it, but I like the genre is
like you want 55 seasons, so you can just keep binge watching.
I feel like people make very little, like seasons should be longer. Like at least of my favorite murder mysteries.
You want that predictable, but that case solve हो रहा है and the story moves on just a little bit.
बिल्कुल.
I'm not a journalist. I always wonder, do journalists keep like CIs? Do they have a network of spies and people who give them stories? Because, you would think about orientations.
Yeah.
Like as a podcaster, what am I oriented towards?
Yeah.
I'm oriented towards perhaps finding out what I'm curious about and how I can answer or solve some of that curiosity by interviewing others. My orientation could be towards becoming more famous as a consequence of being a conduit for someone else's thoughts. But journalists, their orientation is perhaps, glory, of course, but also chasing the story. I've never understood it.
What part?
Like the fact that you chase a story, that you have this set of people who help you unpack the story. The story is unraveling constantly. What is that like? How does this ecosystem work really?
So it depends on what kind of journalism you specialize in, right? So, like, my specialization has been conflict reporting.
Mhm.
So I have covered wars. I cut my teeth as a war reporter. I then spent 2 decades reporting from Jammu and Kashmir on the ground in the Kashmir Valley in its worst years. So my sources, my points of reference, my turn to for expertise became in this space, a lot in this space. So police, military, diplomats, right? Local politicians in the spaces I was covering. By extension, I would report on India-Pakistan summits that would always fail. So by extension, this became my space of my core expertise. I was less interested in political journalism. My first love was to go on assignments that other people would perhaps hesitate to go on. um and therefore my universe became a very different universe of being a conflict reporter, and that's how I self identified, and even now would self identify. Like, one of the reasons that I went to Israel was because I was like, I'm a conflict reporter. That's what I've been all my life. And how can I not report on this conflict? I have to go.
You went right after 7th October 2023?
I went maybe a week to 10 days after. I don't remember precisely, but maybe about 10 days after, because it took time to get visa, to have an internal discussion in my team. Should we go? Some members of my team were like, why are we going? It's not our war. Yes, you're a conflict reporter, but this is not our war. It's not an Indian story. And I was like, no, this is the biggest. Like, I didn't do Russia, Ukraine. It didn't make me feel the same way, but this felt like I should go, and I did go. And so the kind of journalism I do, you have to build sources on the go, because it's right, because you have to I'm going to Israel, for example. I don't know anybody there. I don't know anybody there. It's not a country I've reported on before.
Yeah.
Now your journalistic training is, how do you find sources quickly in a new place? How do you find a source of credible information in a new place? And if you're not sure that it's credible, how many sources do you get, or how do you do the attribution? Do you tell your audience? Sometimes, I don't know. Like, I think the most underappreciated 3 words in journalism are I don't know. So I, for example, in a developing story, have no hesitation in taking my audience into confidence and saying, you know what? It's really confusing here. We heard the sounds of explosion right behind us. We've been told to take shelter all of this has happened. We've been told to take shelter in the bomb shelter in this Airbnb that we're staying right now. So I'm lifting my computer. My camera's going to go off. Run. Hide in the shelter. Get the Wi-Fi back on. Hello, I'm back. Sorry, but I hope you can forgive us because, this is a crazy situation. I actually don't know if the sound of that explosion were rockets coming in from Hamas, or was that was that an explosion from the Israeli side? I couldn't make out. Like, I couldn't make out because it was distant. Like, I'm giving you an example. Sometimes you have to say, I don't know. Then you have to get off being on air, and you have to call somebody who may connect you to somebody else, who may connect you to somebody else. Then you have to be very careful in your attribution. You have to say, I spoke to a soldier in the IDF. However, this is also being said by civil rights activists who are protesting. So you try and get a 360-degree view. And the only exception I would make to this belief in what journalism is when it involves a war that is India at war with an external adversary, where you're less interested in, you're reporting that as an Indian. So if you're
not a member of the international press,
No,
where you're
no.
saying, but Pakistan says this and India says this.
I don't do that.
Yeah.
I don't do that. And I make no bones about the fact that I do not leave my Indian identity
Yeah.
at all as a reporter. Like, it is like one of the I don't shout if I'm interviewing a Pakistani on my show in the way that some television anchors may be. I give them dignified space to express their point of view, but I'm very clear that my response is not as a neutral journalist in this context. It is as a Indian journalist.
I was 2 years old when the Kargil war happened, and I did not know that I would be coming in speaking
Yeah.
with you today, because
Yeah.
I
My
watched.
God, you're a baby.
I can't help it.
No, I'm
Parents just
joking.
had me late.
I'm joking.
They had me early, actually.
Yeah.
For me, what was fascinating was I never thought that I would end up speaking with you
Mm,
because I forget. Well, the movie is called Lakshay.
yes.
They have Preeti Zinta. Preeti
Playing me.
Zinta.
Yeah.
She's based on you.
Yeah. Even her name, Romila Datta.
Yeah.
Her
So
haircut, like all of it.
it's pretty incredible if you think about it that you're one of the. I mean, your mom as well. She interviewed Ranga Birla.
Yeah.
Uh,
Before they were executed. Yeah.
yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that you basically brought the war to people's homes. It was a revolutionary landmark for Indian journalism, for female Indian journalism. I saw the clips, I saw the videos. Um, Take me to that time because for me that is perhaps the start of this conflict reporting in a,
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
truer
absolutely.
sense. And in a very small capacity, I went to Israel last year myself to cover the war, just to sort of understand the Israeli side. I could not really go to the other side and
No, even when I went, there was no access to Gaza.
right. So in my little way, in my vlog as well, when the rockets were firing away, guys, मैं यहाँ पे हूँ, मैं ये देख पा रहा हूँ, and I would just post the screenshots. It was not like I was on the front lines of war, but this is way different for Kargil 1999.
No, Kargil was the front line of war.
Yeah, it is literally two major countries in the south and eastern region of the world are fighting, and lives are being lost, and you're in the middle. First, how did you get access? Second, how did you? Let's start with how did you convince the soldiers to make you a friend and not be
Mhm.
standoffish with you?
Yeah, great question. Let's rewind to my mother's time. My mother was, and not many people know this, my mother was, as far as I know, India's first woman to report a war, ever. And the story I grew up in, my mom died when I was 13 years old, but the stories that we were brought up on was how when she graduates from Punjab University, she wants to get a job as a journalist. She goes to the Hindustan Times. The editor says, we don't have any active roles for women in the newsroom. You can cover the flower shows of the city, like cultural. Yes, it was like that for women. It was like that for women. So she says, I'm not going to not take this opportunity. She takes the opportunity. She proves herself. She goes on to become the head of the bureau. Now, India and Pakistan go to war in 1965. My mother tells her editor that I've proven myself. Send me to the war front. The editor says, I will not send you to the war front because I cannot send a woman to the war front. My mother at this point says, if you're not going to send me to the biggest story that there is to cover, I would like a few days off. There's no television in India in 1965. There are only newspapers. She goes with a notepad and a pen, wearing a sari. These photographs exist. She's wearing a sari. In her sari, she's a cousin in the army. She goes to the Punjab border. She starts reporting the war. And she is India's first woman to be at the front line of war. Now, you have to remember this because this is what has shaped me. What shapes us is important.
Mhm.
Cut to 1999. I am in my 20s. I've just come back from Colombia. And the war breaks out. I'm at NDTV. I am desperate. And I cannot explain to you why, because I'm not from a Fauji family. Like today, I feel half Fauji because I have spent my whole life reporting on the military and I adore them and they have totally shaped who I am. But I had, at this point, I have zero background, zero exposure. I covered Kargil without a bulletproof vest. This is how nascent we were in our war reporting. So did my mother. My mother went on chutti. Not even
You
an
didn't have any
official
standards or
assignment.
precedent for how to.
Nothing. Nobody had ever covered a war for television before. Nobody had. I mean, we were stupid. We had helmets and the army gave us some bulletproof vests when we were there. They were like, what are you guys doing? Bunch of
Yeah.
us like just naive kids. We were kids, right? We didn't understand. It taught us everything we knew. But when we went in, we didn't understand. So it began with me begging NDTV that just kept saying no. Then I had to convince my father, single dad, who knew by then that he couldn't stop me from doing anything I had put my mind to. Then I had to convince the army. And the army said to me, and it was not the army of today where women are in frontline roles in Air Force, Army, Navy. It was a very male zone, right? And one of the things that one of the generals said to me, he said, look, we can't look after you. It's a war. So I said, I don't want to be looked after. What do you mean by this looking after? And he said, there's no guaranteed food. There's no guaranteed place to sleep. And there is no guaranteed bathroom. And you've got to understand these things before you go to a war front. And I said, I understand. what I understood, what I actually learned are two different things. But I understood that I would have to, you know, forego a bathroom and sometimes hide behind a tire and change my clothes, or, um, make that into my de facto bathroom or open field or behind a tree. And that's how I learned how to actually travel anywhere. I can today travel anywhere and not use a dirty restroom, because my training is, you find a field, you make somebody stand guard, and you do it the old fashioned way.
Yeah.
Right? So, anyway, here we are. Now, there's a small group of us that makes a gang. So, there's me, my cameraman Ajmal Jami, there's Gaurav Sawant, who's at India Today. And there's an earlier print guy who's, I don't know where he is, I've lost touch with him, Shashi Kumar, who was a print guy. We are like a gang of 4 in this scenario. Now, how do we get, firstly, it's called India's first televised war. What people don't understand is that there was no live broadcast possible because there were no broadcast vans. We're a very, very early stage of television news. NDTV at this point is still producing news for a channel called Star News. Every script, everything that we do is still vetted by bureaucrats in the Information and Broadcasting Ministry. It's a very different time. Mobile phones are blocked in Jammu and Kashmir for security reasons. So there is no way to make a phone call, right? Except a sat phone. And what is the Kargil war? How did our cameras get access to it? Pakistani soldiers had infiltrated Indian territory, breaking a pact that existed between both countries, that in the winter months it made no sense for Indian or Pakistani soldiers to be stationed on these icy peaks. So in winter, both sides would move back. Pakistanis under Musharraf broke this pact, sent their men in, and captured those peaks. They were Indian territory and the Pakistanis had to be thrown out. But in a war, the people on the heights always have the first advantage. The Pakistanis were on the top of these mountains, looking down, among other things, at the national highway that runs between Srinagar to Leh. In the middle of Srinagar to Leh is a place called Kargil. Hence, it came to be known as the Kargil War. We were able to, our soldiers were climbing up the mountains to get these men out. From the highway were Bofors guns and multi-barrel rocket launchers pounding the mountaintops where the Pakistanis were hiding, and also providing covering fire for our soldiers to go up. The bits of the war that we could access were when we were on the highway. Because we were on the highway, sometimes sleeping in the backseat of a car, sometimes behind a big boulder, sometimes in an underground bunker, we were able to see, capture, and film our rocket launchers hitting them, our Bofors guns pounding the Pakistanis, and then we would be caught in the return fire. Because when we would fire, the Pakistan military on the other side would fire back. And we would have bombs exploding literally at our feet, and we would go running for cover, and we didn't even understand what was happening. And I ended up once in an underground bunker because I lost my cameraman and I got split, and I'm standing next to an ammunition dump, not understanding that it's an ammunition dump. And a young soldier comes to me and says, "Ma'am, you're going to die if you stand here. You need to get into that underground bunker now." And I said, "I've lost my cameraman." And he said, "I'll find him. Go into that bunker now." And he found my cameraman and Gaurav and Shashi, and the 4 of us were in that bunker. And the next morning, Tiger Hill gets taken back and reclaimed by India. And it was just like, even today, I have goosebumps when I talk about it, because it was such a transformative, privileged experience to have, and a privilege to make it back out alive of that situation and be able to tell that story. But people say, "Oh, weren't you scared?" And it would be a lie to say that we were without fear. I think what happens in these life and death situations that are so challenging and become about survival is that your adrenaline is focused on survival, ducking, hiding from the bomb. And then, how do I send? We were shooting on tape. We were in the era of tapes. How do I send my tapes home? So what would we do? We would walk on this highway, and we would reach these pit stops where choppers were taking off, carrying the coffins of our soldiers back home. And we would beg the chopper pilot, "Sir, can you take our tapes? Sir, can you take our tapes?" So where was the time for fear? We had to survive. We have to think of what to say. There were no take twos in war. If you jumped, you jumped. There's a shot of me. You see me. I'm saying something. There's a gun that goes off behind me, and I jump. I don't do it again. I don't take a second take. It is just unvarnished how it was, and the tape went back like that, and you can see me jumping. And Preeti Zinta tries to copy that jump in Laksh. So the point I'm trying to make is that I say I always look at Kargil as a masterclass in life. You asked me a question which I haven't answered yet. How did the soldiers? Why did they trust me?
But if you want to continue on this, you can.
But I want to talk a little bit about the soldiers, and then I'll come back to this. I was asking questions. Firstly, I was 26 and a half years old, and the soldiers were mostly 23, 24. So we were kind of the same age. And while I was wanting to know, okay, what is an MBRL, a multi-barrel rocket launcher? What is the Bofors gun doing? I wanted to know and understand the mechanics of war. I was very interested in the human dimension of this 23-year-old, 24-year-old who is going up a mountain, walking towards his possible death. What makes him do it? Where does his courage come from at this moment? Right? I was very interested to understand the relationship between vulnerability and valor. And I remember interviewing Vikram Batra, who would then become the story of Sher Shah, who would then be associated forever onwards with Ye Dil Mange More. And that interview was my interview from the war front. I didn't know what would happen to Vikram then. I was interviewing him just like I was interviewing any other young soldier. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. Vikram Batra and his team had just come down from the mountains after a successful reclaiming of a mountain peak from the Pakistanis. And they were very full of josh. And they were taking some time off. And I remember them sitting in this white tent. I still remember the long shot of that white tent. They were like, I still remember feeling like they were like snowflakes on a canvas of green. Because if you looked at them from afar, there were these little white tents at the base of a mountain. And I was sitting with them. And there's a photograph of me sitting with them having, I don't know, chai or something. And there was one Cosmo magazine that these boys had been flipping through, whatever, simple pleasures of life, simple unwinding. And Vikram had this sort of smile that went to his eyes. Like his eyes were these deep black eyes. And when he would smile, his smile would go right till here. And I remember saying to him, and nobody had actually asked them this question. And I said, so his code name was Sher Shah. Code name is how soldiers communicate to each other on their walkie-talkies so that the Pakistanis don't know who the person is. So his code name was Sher Shah. And he was describing the successful assault and so on. And then I said, Aapko dar nahi lagta? Aren't you scared? And he threw his head back and he laughed and he said, Ye Dil Mange More. And Ye Dil Mange More was then a Pepsi Cola slogan.
Right.
Which then he just used it. And it became like the motto of a country. And when the news came that Vikram had heroically given his life for our country, I was still at the war front. And one of the first interviews I did became the first obituary I would write. And I remember I was crying when I was writing. The news host was crying when that news finally went. Firstly, none of this was being conveyed in real time because there was this delay in getting the footage back. And 10 years later, I drove with Vikram's twin brother, Vishal. Vishal had never gone to Kargil. We went to the mountain that was now called Batra Top, named after Vikram. And I remember sitting with Vishal there, and Vishal sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and then wrote a letter to his brother. And we kind of, like setting a bird free, we set that letter into the blue skies. And he said, I know, Vikram, you can hear me somewhere. And how much we wept. Like we literally held each other and we wept. And it's very difficult to explain this to somebody who wasn't there. It is, I was a young person with no exposure to the military, reporting on a life and death situation which involved my country and very young, heroic soldiers who were brave, but they were not without vulnerability. And I wanted to tell the story of their human side, broken engagements, broken marriages, great love stories, they were kids, yeah. They were boys who would be men. They were 23 and 24. I mean, we don't appreciate enough in a tactile, felt way what young men at the front line and now young women go through. And I wanted to tell that story. I didn't go with that plan, but that's what I saw. And I just wanted to tell that story. Why did they trust me? Because I was asking them kind of naive questions. Like, आपको डर नहीं लगता? Like, nobody had ever asked a soldier before, because you just assume that a soldier is without fear.
You just assume he's a tactical operator, so you're going to ask him very technical questions.
Yeah, he's not a machine. He's a human being. He has a girlfriend at home. He has a mother at home. He has a father at home. He has a brother at home.
Yeah.
Ask him about that. Ask him how he conquers that. So it was transformative. It was just transformative for me.
I think we're all, those of us who now broadcast our views online and do interviews, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants like you. I'm not trying to flatter you, but I think that kind of immersiveness cannot be comprehended by someone who started their career in a studio, who only simply gets news from other people like yourself or on the streets. So then, of course, this happens. Now,
Well, that's a really important thing you've said, because one of the things I've tried to do at Mojo is I don't want to be just a studio person. And I try very hard that every time there is an occasion for me to be able to report from the field, I do it. I do it in elections. I did it in Manipur. I did it when an Uttarakhand tunnel collapsed. I did it I went to Israel. I went back twice to Kashmir. I went to Pakistan when the foreign minister went there. I try to not become a person whose understanding of life is from the studio. I can't do it every day. I can't do it as often as I could earlier, but I do it, I think, still more than many of my peers who think the studio is a promotion. The reporter to studio relationship is a promotion. I don't see it like that. If you asked me, how do I identify? I could identify as an entrepreneur. I could identify as an anchor. I could identify as a podcast host. I identify as a reporter. I'm a reporter. You ask me today at 53, I've been in journalism for 30 years. How do you identify? I have been an editor of NDTV. I've been an editor of The Group. I have been whatever, blah, 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 blah. How do you identify? I am a reporter. That is my self-identification.
Just to figure out the etymology of the word reporter is to report from what is happening. Perhaps in the Gita, what Sanjay does for understanding ki war mein kya chal raha hai. Literally like that. I have a hypothesis. For those of us who started our careers in COVID, where we could not go out per se, and it was far easier to just get a camera, get some mics and start speaking. I think we're going to start going back to the ground and going back to more offline, in real life things. Because I think what a newer generation of broadcasters lacks is, they have this slang nowadays, hey bro, I think you should touch grass. Because they're not in sync with the reality. Another question before we go back to Kargil. See, one of the challenges that we sort of touched upon in India is bridging the class divide. I happen to be exactly in the middle of both classes. I get all kinds of people on my show. I often see that those who have a good education, perhaps even those who studied abroad, often try to make content for their peers to win the admiration of their peers. Nothing wrong with that.
But it's navel gazing.
Right. On the other hand, there is this custodian of Bharat के लोग जनता को सिर्फ हम ही जानते हैं क्योंकि हम चाय पीते हैं या खाट पे बैठना जानते हैं. Again, more performative rural behaviors than actually deeply being rooted in
Absolutely.
Right? So in this weird dynamic, I see that you're one of the only people who has successfully bridged the class divide, where your pedigree and style of education is all West-centric in the way you've been taught in a more, how do I say it, like Western education, let's just call it like that. But yet, you have been on the ground far more than most custodians of भारत के लोगों को और भारत के आम जनता के लोगों को हम समझते हैं. What has that been like? Because you do it very fluidly.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I'm glad you mentioned COVID, because one of the things that I'm proudest of in my very short journey as a media entrepreneur is that we built this company on the back of boots on the ground COVID reporting. I launched Mojo Story in 2019 end, 1 month before the Delhi riots. 2 months later, we're in COVID. We're 4 or 5 people. We're now about 15, 16. We were 4 people then.
Mhm.
I sit in a car and I leave. And what is the first, for the first 3 months, the story I'm reporting from the ground is what's happening to migrant workers. They're walking back home, what happens to them when they reach home. And they're walking 1000 kilometers, 700 kilometers, 800 kilometers with children on their heads, with nothing to eat, with one bottle of water, one packet of Parle G biscuits. And what is my challenge? My challenge is my audience is cheering themselves up by baking banana bread at home. No, I'm not being sneering.
Mhm.
My audience is English speaking, at that time identifies upper middle class or middle class audience that is at home. How do I make my audience care about this man, poor man, who is walking back to Bihar?
Hmm.
How do I do it? I'm not even on TV anymore. I'm on a platform that nobody knows. It's 3 months old, 4 months old.
And you're just learning the rules of it.
And I'm just learning. मुझे कुछ नहीं मालूम था thumbnail. If you see our reports from that time, we have no thumbnails. Most of the time, we have no thumbnails. We are just uploading content. We have no thumbnails. And I knew that I couldn't pretend to be one of them because, yes, I went through some very tough life and death situations again in COVID. It was very dangerous.
Mhm.
But I was not hungry. I was not starving and I was not walking. Right? So I came from that place of privilege. I was not one of them, but I didn't talk to them like in that performative way. One of the things that really bothers me about contemporary content creators is how much theater there is in it. I can't do it. It's not in me. I can't do it. I understand why it has to be done. And there's a skill in it, and I admire those who have that skill, but mujhse nahi hota wo. I am just still being a reporter saying, why are you walking? Why don't you wait for the train? What is making you walk? Where did you work? And where are you eating? Where are you going to spend the night? So on and so forth. So I don't know that I have some formula for bridging this. And
Right.
often the tonality of it can go wrong. So one of the things I do is I never watch a story I've done. I don't watch it. Because even 30 years later, see, it's a very tough thing to interview somebody in distress without sounding patronizing or insensitive.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
It's very tough. And there is no book that will teach you how to do it. You learn it over time and you can still get it wrong. And to somebody, you can still be grating. To somebody, you can be admirable. And to somebody in your audience, you can still be grating. Right? And I don't read comments. I don't do it. I learned that over time. I don't watch the story again unless it's for I need a picture here to enhance the story. I need to see if the sound is clean. I watch it from a production or a storytelling perspective. I don't watch it to evaluate my own conduct, because you can never have a rule book for how to do this right. There's no rule book. There are certain things you don't do and there are certain things you try and do. That's broadly it. It's just that you have to be interested in it. I am very interested in the stories of people. Right. I believe every person is a story. Literally, class is irrelevant to my interest in you. I am just interested in you because you and me, we all carry stories. And the driver who brought me here, and the migrant worker who's walking back, and the doctor who's treating them. And oh my God, I can never forget this. There's an old lady I meet at the Bandra railway station, Leelavati. I am doing migrant workers. Trains have started. I have gone there to report the trains that are taking back migrant workers. And I see an old lady sitting weeping by herself. And I go to talk to her, and she has been thrown out by her children. She has nowhere to go. And I just sit and interview her. And by the way, it's COVID, but I can't help it. She holds on to my hand and I hug her because it was just how I felt. She was an old lady. She was weeping. She was holding on to me. So I had to hold her back. And everybody watched that story. The railway authorities opened the waiting room for her at night. She comes back. She is then adopted temporarily by a local politician here. She gets a home. Eventually, her daughter in some other place takes her back. And that was the story of Leelavati. And I could not believe how many people were touched by that story. And what that taught me was that if you are willing to be among people on the ground often enough, irrespective of the fact that some people may still hate your style of journalism, it's okay. You will have a connect with your audience that a studio can never give you. At least me. At least that's my experience. Go back to people. Just keep going back to people. Works, doesn't work is secondary. Go back to people.
What's your criteria for success in something like this?
So I'll tell you. People would ask me, the people who didn't like me would ask me, why aren't you making the migrant worker sit in your car? You're a vulture. You are just interviewing these poor people and feeding off their tragedy. You get these kind of comments, right?
Of course.
I said, my job, yes, where I can. So we started, for example, these donation links at the end of every COVID story, like please contribute if you can help this family, etc. Where we could, we gave food, we gave whatever we could do at our small. But that was not my role. There was an institutional need to help these workers who were walking back home. Eventually, the reports I did were placed before the Supreme Court as part of other material. And there was an intervention based on that. That is a criteria of success. That I can move an audience that isn't immediately impacted by this reality. That is a criteria of success. That I could build a platform based on old-fashioned reporting is a criteria of success. That I could take on mammoth television channels in reporting this tragedy called COVID.
Yeah.
Because I was on the ground and there weren't a lot of boots on the ground placed by big television channels. Local reporters, vernacular press, stringers, and a few independent digital journalists. That's how COVID was reported. It was the first lesson that you can be as big as you want to if you don't have the passion to be among people. People were looking towards people to tell them what was really happening. The only way to tell the COVID story was to be on the ground. Channels didn't do that. I mean, I'm not saying there weren't exceptions in every channel. Channels didn't do that. They hunkered down in their studios.
Why'd you become independent? Didn't you have institutional protection and support? Like I really wish that some of us, when we bootstrap our stuff, I mean, I've bootstrapped basically for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Sometimes even I think I wish I was a part of a big organization. So I would have a pad, some designation, a salary, all the quirks and the perks that you get from something like that. Why'd you go independent?
Lots of reasons. No one reason. One is that I had started disagreeing with NDTV's management on content. So we had started having, though, I mean, I will always be grateful to Pranoy and Radhika Roy for, for so much space that I had for so many years. It's a little bit like when a child outgrows home, right? I think I had outgrown that sense of home and belonging. It was a natural process. A lot of other people had left. I was still there. I was toying mentally with the idea for leaving for many years because, the Ornabs, the Rajdeep, everybody had gone. I was sort of the last of the old lot left. And I also had this desire to, I wanted to do a Huffington Post for India at that time. Like, why can't I do my own thing? But then we started kind of disagreeing on a few things, on a few stories. So that became a little bit fraught. So I didn't enjoy that. Secondly, television had become, because the revenue model was broken. It was just broken. That space to go out into the field and report had become less and less. It had just, it was dying. Like it had already become a talk shop. Thirdly, ambition that if you don't climb the next mountain, you're going to plateau. See, this is a tough thing to learn because you can get comfortable and then you just have to retire. Like I could just have been the group editor of NDTV, which I was, and then I could have just retired from that little mountaintop. If I didn't find a new mountain to climb, that is what would have happened to me. Now, I can't say it was so lucid, so well thought. A lot of these decisions are emotional. Then you double guess yourself. As I said, some of it had to do with arguments and disagreements at my place of work. Those conversations didn't go very well. I was like, you know what? I think I'll be better off on my own. Some of it was what is going to happen to me. I've been doing this for by then 22 years. What's next for me? And you know, one of the really harsh truths about this profession is that you're only as good as your last story. It doesn't matter तुमने कारगिल किया, तुमने कोविड किया, अभी तुम कल क्या करोगे? क्या करोगे? What will you do? Who are you tomorrow? And I could see, one reason I didn't share with you, I could see the changes coming. I in fact think I should have left NDTV a little earlier. I was a little later than some of my peers in starting digital. I could see it coming. Consumption patterns changing, people consuming content on phones, shrinking attention spans, nobody being interested in that old form of journalism. So, combination of these factors.
Very interesting. You did an interview with, I believe, a woman called Madhu Trehan. Trying to find the old clips there. Something you said, which really struck me as rather funny. Before that, I'll set some context. So I've not interviewed too many politicians, but I've interviewed a few. Generally, I go through handlers. Rarely do I go through them directly. When I go through handlers, they often will try to say,
you can ask this and not ask this.
Right, but I often skirt around and do what I want to do by the end.
Yeah,
right?
Correct. And to be clear, we didn't have any discussion.
No, none at all.
Of, can I ask this, can I know? You can ask whatever you want to.
None at all.
Yeah, and I'm not a politician. But anyway.
Yeah, no, so all of this happens and I often go in the room and I'm surprised by how warm they are to podcasters, because this breed of this breed of broadcasters, whatever, like online, I don't know how to call it, like they just see us as very pliable
and friendly and
warm,
and
no agenda pushing per se, no penetrative harsh questions that they don't have to prepare. So it's a PR op in a nutshell, with like, it's more about the human, like they're like, आप human interest की बात करो, आप positive tone होना चाहिए. I've spoken to numerous parties, numerous quasi-governmental organizations. Like, I always get this. Now, the problem is that they expect all of this, but for my class of broadcasters, it's not like we can ask probing questions and then also do follow-ups, because we don't read the news. We don't care enough. Our current affairs knowledge is best,
Instagram
or quickly put together by teams of young, hardworking college students who are not that political themselves. So you run the risk of being demolished. So you choose the safer side. Now, someone who's a current affairs enthusiast, who's read the news, worked in the news all your life, you're not like that, right? If we approach together a member of parliament, of course, you're much senior and much more accomplished than I am, the chances of them saying yes to you, like they're going to spend some time thinking, should we really do an interview?
Oh yeah, they'll say yes to you more than they'll say yes to me.
Right.
No question.
So it gets me thinking, because in this interview, you say that there is a way in which you feigned friendliness and camaraderie with politicians in order to really get the best out of them per se. I call this rapport building, but I don't think I can possibly feign that friendliness. But this is an old interview. So when you would interview politicians, and you interviewed like the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, and many others, how would you sort of like set this up?
So maybe the correct word, because it's an old interview, I don't remember it, is not feign, but maybe I should say that my style, and this goes back to this way we are all brought up. I'm not a rude interviewer. I don't style myself. I don't think that my independence is going to be measured by how harshly I talk to you or how much I raise my voice, right? Yeah. Or wag my finger. There is a certain kind of persona, broadcast persona. I'm not that. But I will ask, I will ask a difficult question in a mischievous way. I will smile at the end of it. My own belief is that is more likely to evoke a headline answer.
Right.
Than which anyway makes the person like this.
They get combative and defensive at the same time.
So what is the purpose? Is the purpose to show off how tough you are as an interviewer? Some people like that and get off on that. My my interest is, can I get a great headline out of this?
Yeah.
Right? I find people who are comfortable with you in that environment tend to speak more openly, and the chances of them giving you something that they're actually thinking or they've actually never said before is much greater. So it's not कि मैं ऐसे plan करके जाती हूँ, it's just my style.
Yeah.
Because this is my style, there are some interviews I've had to reject. So for example, Bilawal Bhutto was then Pakistan Foreign Minister, came to India for the SCO summit. And we discussed internally, should we interview him? And I said, you know what, let's pass it. So, and for a journalist to pass an interview, I said, because you know what, he's going to talk trash.
Mm.
I'm not going to be able to be rude to him because I'm not rude. I'm not going to shout at him. I'm going to say, well, Mr. Bhutto, with respect, I disagree. That's not what I think as an Indian. As an Indian, I see terrorist, patronage for terrorists, etc., etc. And more than that, and I said, in my country, on my sort of nation's soil, I don't want rubbish said about India. I
Mhm.
passed that interview because I know that I'm not that finger wagging persona. I'm just not that person. I'm a polite person. That's how I was raised. I'm a polite person. Now, that's the style I believe in. Now, that style has advantages and it has disadvantages. Its disadvantages are that you cannot, an interview that I do will have some form of civility in it. So, for example, um, you were not on the show with us. You were on the show with us on the Coral Camera incident, but there was
Mhm.
another show we had on the same incident where the man who led the vandals
Rahul Kanal.
was on
You
the
had
show.
Anish Gawande, Rahul Kanal, and Kushal on the
Yeah.
show.
So we
Yeah.
had, now a lot of people in the audience said you were not tough enough on Rahul Kanal. To
Yeah.
me, I sped read. I don't read, but I could see that some people were feeling कि तुमने इसको बुलाया क्यों? Other people were. Now I believe that I asked him everything that needed to be asked. That I was more editorial than I am normally. That I said to him that, do you concede that you broke the law? Why are you out on, you're out on bail, but you're out on bail on the assumption that you won't break the law again, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. Now, but there is an essential civility to my program that I will never break. I will not break the civility of my program. So I was not shouting at him and saying, get out of my show now, you Rahul Kanal, how could you do this? I was being very firm with him. I made no bones about the fact about what I thought about his vandalism, how he had behaved. And I even said, look, I don't understand your schizophrenia. You're sitting here smiling at me and calling me ma'am. And there for some 15 seconds of fame, you are breaking some studio, this thing. Like,
Yeah.
what is, like, who are you?
It was very funny, mostly because I actually have seen him before his Ozempic stuff kicked in for a long time. I always used to think, oh, because he's very famous on Instagram.
Yeah.
So he would post pictures with celebrities a lot.
Yeah.
So I would see, oh, this guy is rising up in Maharashtra
Yeah.
politics. I don't know who he is. And he used to
Yeah.
be a part of the then joined Sena. To then see him,
Yeah.
by the way, he posts pictures with every celebrity. you can
Yeah,
possibly
and
imagine.
I asked him, he had some restaurant which is named after Salman Khan, or he consults on that restaurant. I was like, what if somebody had walked into your
Yeah,
restaurant and
no,
done this?
he's objectively a very dignified, like social person. In that, I saw that, by the way. So I was
Yeah.
very surprised to see why he was shouting so much.
Because, but that's my point, that beyond a point, I can't shout
Right.
because I'm not made that way. And so there is a limitation and an advantage to my persona, and I recognize both. But I'm not going to change that
Yeah.
because one thing we haven't spoken about is authenticity. I don't want to act on, I'm not an actor. I'm a journalist. I'm a host. I'm an interviewer, right? I am not an actor. Now, I think today there is some requirement of acting, which I can't do. I cannot do it. And it's not because I'm not agile and I'm not adapting to the times. I am very adapted to the times. I know a lot of tech. I'm always looking at the latest AI apps. I'm always looking at, like, okay, now how can content be created better? I love tech. I love it. But so I'm not a dinosaur sitting there thinking, oh, I'm so old now. I don't feel old at all. I don't feel old at all. I feel very young, 18 till I die, all that. But I don't want to be an actor.
Right.
So many content creators today are acting. Why are they acting? Why are they doing drama?
Yeah.
No, it works for them. That's the short answer.
What's the most tough interview you've done of a politician? You haven't done too many because you've been on the ground mostly, but the few that you have, I've tried to see a few.
Sonia Gandhi,
Yeah.
absolutely opaque. just opaque, such a closed person, can't get her to relax and say anything sort of real, which is unvarnished, and raw, very difficult. In non-politicians, Amitabh Bachchan,
Hmm.
same, very highly controlled. Like, cannot get him to say one thing that he doesn't want to say.
Really?
Yes. I mean, the only real thing he said to me, and I was like, oh wow, I finally got something like real out of him, was I said, what do you think about old age? Like, what do you think about when you think of aging? And he said, I think I'll walk into a restaurant, people won't recognize me. And I thought that was a pretty real thing for a superstar like him to say. But it was a very rare moment. But he's a highly controlled interviewee. I would say these people are tough because you can't get anything. They're so closed as people,
Hmm.
or closed/controlled. Bachchan doesn't come across like that. He comes across as very chilled and very relaxed, but he's very because he's an actor. He
Mhm.
knows exactly what veneer to put on. Sonia Gandhi is a highly opaque, reserved, closed person. Shy, maybe even, I don't know, awkward, whatever the word you want to use
Mhm.
for it. Very difficult to interview her. I've done short interviews with her twice, and I've never managed to get anything out of her.
Was it you in the clip where Lalu Yadav calls you a male?
And thought it was a compliment, and people thought it very funny.
Yeah, I
Mm.
I kept laughing. You
It
you
was
are
me.
male. So just what was
I mean,
that?
he said you're brave like a guy or something. He thought he was
Yeah.
he thought he was paying me a compliment on my courage, because it's a little bit like Indira Gandhi was famously called the only man in her cabinet, right, when she was prime minister. Because these are the stupid benchmarks that people have, that if you're not if you're not seen as girly and you're seen as tough, then you're
Mhm.
like the guys. So this is what was used for Indira Gandhi, and this is what Laluji, in some strange way of his, thought was a way to pay me a compliment.
Right.
कि आप बहादुर हैं,
Yeah.
आप तो लड़के जैसे बहादुर हैं, whatever he said. I don't remember the exact whatever he said. So look, it is true that toughness and women, we still haven't figured out a language for that, right?
Mm.
And we either go to the other extreme of some post-feminist claptrap that, oh, a woman doesn't have to become like a man to be a tough woman. But we actually don't know what it is to be like a woman, be like a man. These are still debates happening around the world. I don't have any
Sure.
easy answers to that. What I know is you question it. I question everything. I question everything. I question, do I want to do this because it's my conditioning, or do I want to do it? Will I ever know the difference? Every day is a process of finding space where you feel comfortable in. And I think I would only say to other women and to men,
Mhm.
try and live the most authentic version of yourself that you can, away from conditioning and social pressure.
Sometimes what ends up happening is my friends and family um, suddenly find out I have access to people in places that surprises them, and it often comes at the cost of being isolated, where they might not understand what I do, so they isolate me,
Okay, what do
or
you mean they isolate you?
in the sense that they're surprised at how much access I have.
Like, all these famous people.
Sure, something
Yeah.
like that. And so what ends up happening is that you learn to just keep a lot of things to yourself.
Hmm.
I'm using this. I wasn't aware about the Radia tapes controversy at all. I recently watched the whole video, right? And your name often comes up. You're scapegoated in that particularly. You and Tangvi. I watched the part where you were having a conversation with Neera Radia. Now I can totally understand why something like that would happen. But was it difficult to build back your career after that? Was it a big splotch, or like a huge thing that weighs in on your career even now, so many years later?
So it's an interesting question, because I feel like if it happened today, the same controversy, I would respond to it very differently.
Mhm.
I think I was somewhat naive and young, and so shocked that my credibility had been questioned, that I went overboard in explaining myself for something in which I had done, according to me, absolutely nothing wrong. But what did I do? Again, it comes from the shock of somebody who's always valued their own integrity up there,
Mhm.
and to have that questioned. like not cared about other people's opinions ever. But oh my God, they questioned my integrity. Oh my God, they
Right.
questioned my integrity. What did I do? I called 4 editors to grill me. AMA on live television saying, I'm not scared of your questions. I have nothing to hide. Come ask me questions. One of them was Manu Joseph, who was one of the magazines at that time who had printed this so-called story. And I said to him that I have a text message from you.
Hmm.
I have a text message from you saying to me on text that, hey, Barkha, I know you did nothing wrong. It was just innocuous source chatting. And I said, then you put me on the cover. So first he laughed and he said, I don't remember this verbatim, but the tape is there. You can take it out, and I mean, the link will be there and you can see it. First he laughed and he said, Are yaar, you're a nice person to put on the cover. It'll help us sell more magazines. And then he said, But Barkha, it's very wrong for you to quote from a private conversation. So I said, do you realize the irony of what you just did here? You are quoting from an intercepted, leaked private conversation that I had with somebody on the phone.
Uh-huh.
And you are telling me that it is unfair for me to quote from a SMS text that you sent me. Now, I give this as an example to make the point that I should have not explained myself. I should have not explained myself. Because I did nothing except get information out of a source in a very innocuous, normal way, which is called chatting up a source. My body of work on A. Raja, a man I've never met in my life. It's highly amusing to me that one of the allegations against me at the time was that I helped him become a minister. I've never met this man. Don't know probably a single, never met anybody in the DMK except like I think one person.
Yeah.
कुछ नहीं, इन्फॉर्मेशन गॉसिप हो रहा है कि यार क्या सुन रहे हो कैबिनेट के बारे में, उससे बात होगा तो ये उनसे पूछना, अच्छा ठीक है आप क्या सुन रहे हो, दैट्स इट, नॉर्मल शिट. आई वाज सो straightforward, so simple in a way that I over explained myself. I regret that. That's the only thing I regret. Was it difficult for me to build my career after that? I don't think so. I think I was the same person before and the same person after and the same person during. I just got smarter about the fact that organized attacks, sometimes they come from within your fraternity. Sometimes they come. I thought Radia was a lot about within my fraternity, by the way.
Yeah. They cannibalized you.
Look, they were happy that Schadenfreude to see somebody else. Usko khincho thoda
Yeah.
niche. She thinks she's a big star. Usko thoda khincho. Like, if you actually ever get into those tapes, you'd be quite amused at who got focused on and who got let off, which
Yeah,
which
which is-
includes a number of our current media stars.
Yeah, I'm very surprised at that. I had a drink a long time ago and watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
But-
So, I mean, like, it'd be highly boring, but like, I know enough of it to know at that time because it concerned me. So, the short answer to this question is that people still ask this question. And I'm glad they asked this question because what I want to say is I over explained myself. We normalized in the way we, being the media, the way the media pounced on the story because they had an opportunity to, they thought, bring down some other journalists.
Mhm.
They forever legitimized leaked, discontextual conversations as a way to judge people. Then they shouldn't crib when their own WhatsApp conversations leak. And they are judged on the basis of that. And we've seen that happen to a few of our stars.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So no regrets there. Just regretted how I handled it because I was simpler, younger, and more vulnerable.
How do you discern if someone's out to get you? I've only recently started to understand these coordinated attacks. And before we sort of end the conversation, I've seen narratives build up in front of my own eyes. I've seen how narratives are planted, and I've seen Twitter as a hotbed of it, where mostly political parties will have these narrative wings that push narratives.
Absolutely.
These accounts. If I search, give me 10 controversial things that Barkha Dutt has said, Twitter is going to do what he's going to do is he's going to pull up all these anonymous accounts with 25K followers that will write threads on you.
Yeah.
It's a detailed attack thread on you, and they're all written on the same day. So you can kind of see that, okay, there's a systematic attack against you by someone who doesn't like you. But how did you start understanding that there are members of the media in pockets, but then there are also these shadow groups that operate to destroy you or to bolster someone else? And how do you guard against that?
When I was, again, younger, more vulnerable, didn't understand this organized gotcha attempts, I would engage with people's comments. I would actually sit there and explain myself or argue with them and say, no, it didn't happen like this, but I meant this. How can you say this? I'm so angry that you said that. Oh, if you say this, nuts, right?
Yeah.
You understand by being on social media after a period of time, by being in this profession after a period of time, that you've got to have the discipline to have a thick skin and not engage, because the whole idea of this is to break your spirit, is to get under your skin, is to provoke you into reaction. The strongest thing that you can do for yourself is to not respond. Indifference is so much more powerful than engagement. But I wasn't born with this great wisdom. I went through this baptism by fire by actually making the mistake of engaging with what I thought were my critics. And then you realize that actually these are not your critics. They couldn't give a shit about your explanation, your counter argument, your way of maybe seeing it differently. They only want to smear you. They want to make you less confident. They want you to make you worry about expressing yourself openly. So what you've got to do is actually learn to gloss over comments on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram. If you spot in that mess, because sometimes it's useful, an interesting voice, you need to reach out to them for a story, they become a contact, they become somebody you call to your shows, do it. Ignore the rest. Ignore it. You will spot the pattern. And also, even if it's not a pattern, even if it's somebody who genuinely hates me, what can I do? Hate me? I don't care. I don't care. One of the brilliant things about experience is how little you realize you care. I literally do not care. And by the way, that has to apply to praise also. I think being truly liberated from other people's opinion is to wear praise very lightly and wear criticism with absolute indifference.
And how do you derive your sense of self-worth?
From my own benchmarks and from keeping a very close circle of friends who won't care tomorrow whether you are on TV, on camera, successful, non-successful, because they knew you from before or they love you anyway. They don't care. They'll make fun of you, but they'll stand like a, army between you and someone who's out to hurt you. Everybody needs their 2 or 3 their persons. They can be buddies, they can be family, whatever form that comes in. You need to keep yourself real. Your sense of self has to come from living an authentic life. You can't become somebody else's idea of you and cater to that. That you can't do. And I think, just as I guess, close, one of the things I worry about with young people, and not to sound like some kind of freaking auntie here, because I don't feel like some auntie, I feel like a very young person. When there's so much peer pressure from these social media platforms, I have seen people modulate their opinions to get likes. I've seen people not express themselves to not get dislikes. I've seen people want to look a certain way because that's how other people on Instagram look, right? Use language that other people look. They don't want to be considered like not with it, not in with the
They want to
crowd,
be classy.
right? This is all BS, man. If you're not yourself, eventually you'll be nothing. Be yourself. Easier said than done. Very tough. But that should be anyone's life goal, should be that. Be yourself.
What is your advice to someone like myself who finds themselves at the junction of whatever this is, this career,
Mm-hmm.
and what the future holds? Because there are some core principles that you follow. That is why you've had sustained success across platforms that someone like me can mimic. Because one challenge for my profession and those like myself is there are no benchmarks. There
Right.
are no schools for it. I mean, I just happen to study, much
Wandered
like
into
you,
it, yeah.
a degree in mass comm. I studied advertising, but a lot of the principles were similar, which sort of helped me understand. But largely, I use my own curiosity as a way to guide myself through this career. How do we make sure that, I guess now in a world which is so online, which is so saturated with content, how do we make sure that, number one, we stand out, and number second, what's going to remain true 20 years from now as well? Because you've seen more decades in this than I have.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. And I guess the only thing I can say is be ready to unlearn, but not unlearn your principles.
Okay.
I'm ready to unlearn formats, ways of storytelling, use of technology, my idea of how content should be presented. But if I believed that this is my idea of integrity, I'm not ready to unlearn that because that's authenticity.
Mhm.
So authenticity is really critical to me. Passion is really critical to me. We are okay. We may not be like Amir, ghar ke Amir log. We are middle class kids who made it for ourselves. I don't know much about you, but I'm assuming that here. Um, we've got to be self-made, but we still have the privilege to work for passion. We're not working to have 2 square meals a day,
Sure. True
right?
that.
So we're working. If we're not working to put 2 square meals a day on our table, then we have the space to find out what we love and do it. Like there's no excuse in this short life to not be doing the things that you love professionally. There's also no excuse to do it with less than 100%. And here, not to be a Narayan Murthy or L&T chairman or whatever, but whenever people ask about work-life balance, I would like to say that there is an assumption that work and life exist in 2 separate boxes. They do not exist in 2 separate boxes in many professions. Maybe in some professions they can.
Sure.
In many professions they can't and they don't. For instance, the Supreme Court statement on this Mr. Justice Yashwant Verma came at 11:45 at night, and at midnight we were live. We were live with the story because the videos had been placed in public domain, and I was like, oh my god, these videos, we have got to put them out now. Now, the reason I mention this is an empathetic work environment is a work environment that will accept that some days my colleagues are going to bring their home to work. They are.
Mhm.
They're going to bring ill parents, children who are ill, PTA meetings, they're not well, whatever. They're going to bring it to work. But equally, they're going to some days take work to home. We are a sum of all of our parts. They don't exist in little neat boxes with ribbons on them,
Mhm.
right? If we are passionate about what we do, if we are, then we are going to have spillovers. If we are, the rest of our life is going to spill into work, and work is going to spill over into the rest of our lives. So you do the best you can that both spaces have space for the other, because it isn't going to be neat and tidy. We are not contract workers that we put our pen down after 8 hours and then we go, what's happened? Equally, we're not robots that a bad day at home is not going to impact us at work. It's not going to happen. That's my view.
Mhm.
That said, I'm no one to advise you, but I would just say authenticity, passion, unlearning without unlearning principles. Get with the tech. The world is changing. It's changing now. It's not changing tomorrow. It's changing now. Get with the tech. Be hungry. Be curious. Always ask questions. Enjoy what you do. It's all about loving it, man. If you don't love it, why are you doing it? Do something else, but love it.
What if you encounter failure on the way? Because I'm
Mhm.
sure that what is path breaking, what is considered path breaking now, was often a horrible thing to do and often fail in the market many times.
Agreed. So you wrestle with that. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say that I have never had days where I am not unhappy. I've never had days where I've not had to wrestle with, why isn't this working? I thought this was so good. Why isn't it doing better? I have all of those questions. But then you become a student and you say, you know what? If I put Manipur News latest in front of that great story, people are going to watch that great story. It's a great story, but you didn't put Manipur News latest in your.
We have to start doing that. We have to start doing that for sure.
Always be a student. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, no. I think we should go back to our rage bait. We should say Barkha Dutt destroys me. Barkha Dutt destroys new generation podcasters. Barkha Dutt roasts my interview. ये ज़्यादा चलेगा. We should do that. Barkha, it was lovely to have you on my show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making this happen on in this studio in Safdarjung, which is not far away from your studio. I honestly will also say thank you for inviting me to your show. I've never been on a news show, like I was telling you on WhatsApp, that I thought I was going to be skinned alive by the political commentary, the spokesperson class, but that wasn't the case. You were very nice, very gracious. I'd love to have you back on my show as well.
And
Thank
vice
you so much.
versa.
Did you enjoy the podcast? Head over to Dostcast on Spotify for more unreleased episodes and the best of Dostcast. Link in description.